Welcome everybody to Cosmodore. It is finally time to talk about what many consider to be one of the worst Spongebob seasons, with many episodes that have sparked very heated discussions that go on to this day. But is it as bad as people say it is? That is what we're going to find out today, as I'm counting down the whole season, including the specials, ranked from worst to best. Keep in mind that these picks are just my personal opinion, which, as was pointed out to me at length in my season 4 and 5 list, can be unique to say the least, so do let me know which episodes you would have put on which spot instead. I'd also like to mention that I've set up a little Patreon for my channel, the link to which is in the description, so if you want to get some super cool additional content, some even cooler exclusive roles on my Discord server, or just support the channel, feel free to click that little read more to also see the other episodes in the series. And now, without further ado, this is SpongeBob Season 6, ranked from worst to best. Number 47 is The Splinter. The Splinter! Oh, what can be said about this episode that hasn't already been said a million times? Nothing, really. So let me reiterate, because whatever you have heard about it is 100% true, and anyone denying it is living a lie. This is, without a doubt, the single most grotesque, unnecessary, poorly paced, hideous, gross, disturbing, cringe-inducing, and just incomprehensively bad episode of SpongeBob's first 6 seasons. And that's saying a lot, seeing as how I've already talked about Fungus Among Us and Flea in Her Dome. When I shared my thoughts on those episodes, many of you were quick to point out that I don't seem to like gross out episodes all that much. And you're right! You might even say that I consider episodes that do nothing more than rely on making the viewer cringe and to shock them to be the lowest form of entertainment in animation, at least when there is nothing else going on that supports the episode in terms of humor or plot, of which there is exactly none here. All of it is simply built around SpongeBob's mutated toffee apple looking thumb. Oh, you know what, that isn't exactly true. We also have some patronizing of Squidward towards SpongeBob and foot fetishism thrown into the mix. Doesn't that just scream fun? The good news is that this episode is so terrible that all the other episodes on this list are immediately way better just by comparison. So I guess we should really be thankful for the Splinter. Did I just say that out loud? Number 46 goes to Clash of Triton. So yeah, while the quality gap between the Splinter and this episode is enormous, that doesn't mean that this episode is tolerable by any stretch. I think that it's a severely under-hated episode. From SpongeBob being painfully oblivious to everything that is happening around him, over the most ridiculous character designs in the entire show, to painful pacing. But what always rubbed me the wrong way in particular is that the moral in the end is just ridiculous, because we are supposed to sympathize with Triton, I think, but we can't because he's a douche to his father, who we can't sympathize with either because he is mean to his son, and we can't sympathize with SpongeBob and Patrick either because they just don't really benefit to the reconciliation at all! I get that they were trying to portray a difficult father-son relationship, which we haven't exactly seen in the show up until this point, but they handled it so poorly, without any charm or development beyond, "Oh, you just don't get it, Dad!" "No, you don't get it, son." And there are also some smaller gripes I have with this episode, like how poorly the ad break is handled, with SpongeBob just suddenly being on the supposedly deserted and faraway island without any exposition whatsoever, or the complete lack of any comedy whatsoever. Nothing in this episode stands out, and I just don't get what made them decide to turn this one into a special, when some other episodes on this list could have really used the extra runtime. I'm not mad, just disappointed. Needless padding out of the opening, with Mr. Krabs continually coughing for no reason, which doesn't amount to anything as Mr. Krabs just goes away. SpongeBob acting creepily and annoying Squidward. Squidward claims to have never visited nor called SpongeBob, despite this having happened on several occasions before. SpongeBob acting creepily and annoying Squidward. On the road. If this was 24 hours later, they wouldn't be working as if it were the middle of the day, if we were supposed to believe that Squidward was already having dinner and did his laundry after work just the day before.
Has Squidward ever visited you at home?
Only once.
Again, this has happened on several occasions before. 1 second Patrick has a lot of glue on his hand, the next it's gone, as is the puzzle piece. What would SpongeBob need the scaffold for? He wasn't working on the exterior of his pineapple. SpongeBob breathing creepily at Squidward. If I ever wanted a trope to die, it's this one. More completely unnecessary and unfunny Squidward torture porn, this time in the form of straight up burning his house down. And once again, SpongeBob does not feel bad for it in the slightest.
Yes, I love another spot of tea, Mr. Vacuum Cleaner.
Number 44, Choir Boys. Choir Boys is one of the most poorly executed episodes in the season. The exposition is awful. It just starts off with Squidward literally explaining to the audience what he's up to today. And whenever they have a joke, it just gets dragged out endlessly, like SpongeBob laying around in the sand for a solid minute or so, or SpongeBob trying to find the right pitch while Squidward is laying beside him screaming in agony, like what? This is neither funny nor in character. Why would SpongeBob consciously let this happen? I guess this just goes to demonstrate the main issue most people have with this episode, which is that it's just so frustrating to see Squidward be genuinely excited for something, only for SpongeBob to ruin it for him in every possible way, and end up even being better at singing than him. They didn't even bother to get the original voice actor for the granny playing piano, so they just went with Tom Kenny instead. What a disgrace. And we have the third Squidward related episode in a row. Huzzah! I used to actually also confuse this one with the season 4 episode Good Neighbors because of the lodge thing they have going on in that one too. And to be honest, it shares a lot of the same traits. But unlike Good Neighbors, which I personally hold in very high regard, I just really don't like this episode. Squidward gets a lot less chances to redeem himself and really is just being punished for his mere existence, which isn't funny to begin with. But then when he gets the chance to be accepted in his lodge again, it just gets ruined because of SpongeBob and Patrick. Not only that, but this episode is also eerily similar to the Simpsons episode Homer the Great as far as the plot is concerned. Or you know what, that is an unfair comparison, because that episode actually managed to get some humor out of it. Number 42, Pets or Pests, combines many of the things I don't like. Needlessly disturbing imagery, the plot device of a new pet in SpongeBob's house that Gary doesn't get along with, SpongeBob's friends being mean towards him for no reason in particular. And I'm sorry, but didn't we already see this concept executed much better in Rockabye Bivalve? There, we at least had a cute pet being the center of attention and some actually sweet moments between SpongeBob and Patrick, whereas this episode is neither funny nor has any memorable jokes. It's really just SpongeBob going around town, showing these worm things to people that end up getting green goo in their faces. I simply don't get the point in making what is clearly a copy of another episode in a much more poorly executed way without anything to warrant its existence in the first place. It mostly just makes me feel bad for Gary, if anything. Oh, and speaking of feeling bad for Gary, number 41 is shell-shocked. Hey kids, how'd you like an episode where virtually nothing happens except for SpongeBob destroying stuff and not being punished for it in the slightest, and Gary having to pay for it for some reason? Doesn't that just sound like nonsense? This episode hurt me physically, no joke. If there was ever some stupid BuzzFeed list of the top 10 times SpongeBob was too dumb for his own good or something, I'm sure this would be very high up. I do like Angry Jack as a character though. I wouldn't mind him having a major role in a future episode. Number 40 goes to Missed or Potential. Wow, true for square. What a train wreck of a so-called TV movie. We have an episode that just throws celebrities at you left and right, has very poor pacing and really doesn't care about any consistency, with characters jumping in and out of flashbacks and them just suddenly being at the end of the episode without any tension being present, and even poorer so-called comedy skits with Patchy sprinkled in between that stretch out these 22 minutes of animation into a 52-minute long mess meant to celebrate SpongeBob's 10th anniversary? I have to go with square here, because that can't be the truth. Not only did I not know of most of these celebrities growing up, but they didn't even add anything to the story. And I'm putting story in some very strong quotation marks here, which I think is appropriate because apparently not even the writers were all too confident in their own story, seeing as how they changed it for every iteration of the tie-in video game. Luckily, those games aren't actually all that bad, especially the Wii version of it, and I like the stop-motion intro to this episode. It does have some creative moments here and there, and manages to sometimes give me a good chuckle, but it isn't nearly enough to save this one. Number 39, Gone. I enjoy this episode's premise a lot, I really do. I've always been more of an introvert and much rather stay home alone than going out with friends or something, so of course I wondered what a life without anyone around would be like before. And I really hope that it wouldn't turn out like this, because while it's cute to see Spongebob take on the different professions of his friends, I just find it disturbing to think about that these same so-called friends would up and leave just to get away from Spongebob for not just one day, but several weeks from the looks of it. Not only that, but there's also barely any comedy in this one, and too much time is spent on that stupid boat here, only to not really get resolved in the end. If you wanna see this concept done right, just watch Last Man on Earth, which I really can't recommend highly enough. Number 38, The Card.
Not so fast. Where's my dollar?
Here you are.
You're meaning to tell me that these trading cards only cost $1 a pack? Eesh, Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy must not be selling as well as they used to. Again, I like the premise of this episode a lot. As an ex-Pokemon card collector, I definitely know the feeling of wanting that one card. The one that is going to change my life forever. Even though when I finally got it, I just heard news that there is an even better one on the market already, because of course they want to make money off of these. But not only is way too much time spent on the beginning of this episode, but most of all, it is just not very believable to me that even someone as dumb as Patrick would not freak out over a limited edition Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy card when they, in the same season, establish him as a certified Barnacle Boy impersonator. So this episode, most of the time, is just frustrating. Even though I really like this line.
You can't always expect my usual brand of stupidity. I like to mix it up.
Number 37, Grooming Gary. I like the designs on all the different snails and the moral in the end of standing up against the man, in this case the owners, but they just had to immediately destroy it with a dumb Patrick line in the end. Plus there were some very disgusting moments involving Gary's slime, which were also just dragged out for way too long. What saved this episode are some of the visual gags, like this fish flying away Mary Poppins style and Gary's teenager wig, but they don't stand out enough to warrant the episode being higher up. Number 36, Porous Pockets. This episode's premise is too easy, and doesn't really go beyond its concept. SpongeBob and Patrick get rich and spend their money on various stuff. One gets condescending and cocky because of it and puts his wealth over friendship. It's one of the show's most cookie-cutter concepts ever, and I also just find it weird that SpongeBob was the one being turned into this bigwig character, because if I could imagine anyone being too dumb to grasp the concept of money, it's Patrick. I think that would have also made for some much more interesting ideas, seeing as how Patrick would probably have spent all his money on much more useless junk than SpongeBob did. Number 35, Boating Buddies. The part of the episode where they are driving around town like lunatics and bursting through various shops and such is pretty fun, and the little Frankenstein reference here is kinda cool, but other than that, this episode just wasn't all that special. Just more SpongeBob pestering for the sake of some super cheap dialogues.
Squidward, it's you! I thought I heard something.
I've been sitting here motionless for 45 minutes. What could you possibly have heard me doing?
Breathing.
Oh, that's just creepy. Number 34, Slide Whistle Stooges. Squidward behaving differently than usual in the form of showing some more childlike character traits is a concept that already got explored in other episodes, but I really find myself enjoying seeing what they come up with for these episodes. But when Squidward's sanity gets sacrificed because of it, it just isn't fun anymore, and that whole first half of the episode is nothing more than exactly that. But I really do like the second half of this one. It reminded me of Skill Crane a lot for some reason. Does anyone actually use these slide whistles though? I've never seen one in real life. They can't be as annoying as Vuvuzelas. Number 33, Giant Squidward. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but didn't we already have an episode focused on resizing various objects and characters before? Twice! With both episodes being much more entertaining than this one. Here, the thing that is the main plot device isn't an awesome superhero belt with different functions or a ginormous shrink ray, it is a fertilizer. Okay. It certainly doesn't help that Squidward didn't really do anything to deserve having to justify himself in front of the other citizens. It really seems like they were just trying to find a lame excuse to set up this plot, with some admittedly okay visual gags at times, like Spongebob and Patrick sleeping in Squidward's belly button, but nothing really makes this episode stand out at all. Number 32, Gullible Pants. This has got to be one of the slowest setups for an episode. It takes about a third of its overall length just to establish SpongeBob being the manager, only for Squidward to then realize how gullible he is. But didn't he already know that before? And had he used this newfound knowledge to benefit him in such a way that he has less work to do, I'd understand that. But he mostly just makes him do pointless stuff that leads virtually nowhere, only for Mr. Krabs to be the one that has to clean up in the end. This is just a strange and boring setup that has some jokes in it that are just not worth mentioning. Number 31, Professor Squidward. I will say that I like how this episode basically jumped straight into action, with Squidward taking up his new identity pretty quickly, but other than that, it is just painful to watch how SpongeBob and Patrick are completely oblivious as to how annoying they are. Not to mention that the scenes in class are basically just a rehashed version of New Student Starfish, and that there is really no reason for Squidward to snap at the reporter this easily. If anything, he would normally be thankful to have a little more publicity. However, I will say that I like that Patrick and SpongeBob seem to genuinely feel sorry in the end, albeit to the disfavor of Squidward, and how Squilliams is then just standing there, motionlessly, pondering the vein of his existence, or whatever else is going on in that puny brain of his, and whatever else might remain in the miserable thing he calls life. Number 30, To SquarePants or Not to SquarePants. One of the dumbest episode titles, and honestly the whole concept of this episode is just as dumb as its title, with SpongeBob buying a new pair of pants which are round now, but look virtually the same as his old ones, yet he doesn't get accepted as SpongeBob anymore for some reason, so he changes his whole identity because of it? Okay. But isn't that essentially just Who Bob What Pants with the whole new life shtick? But here it really only gets explored for a few minutes before SpongeBob just super easily gets convinced to go back to his former self, and it really feels as though nothing was achieved in this episode. I will say that I liked SpongeBob doing everything Squidward would normally do alongside him though. Those scenes were pretty cute. Number 29, Pineapple Fever. The concept of Squidward, Patrick and SpongeBob being stuck in the same house together because of a storm could be fun. I mean, it's basically the same plot as Club SpongeBob, but it wouldn't have to be terrible. However, this episode is really just boring, and the last third ripped off Ugh even harder than it did Club SpongeBob. Not to mention that the part where Squidward ripped off part of his skin because of SpongeBob and Patrick was just completely unnecessary and gross. I do really like some of the visual effects, like the lightning and Patrick turning old very quickly, plus Squidward is really cute in these slippers, but other than that there's just not much that would make me want to go back to this episode. Number 28, Plankton's Regular. This one made me go, nah, this is too good to be true, the entire episode through more than any other one, and also actually made me really want to see Plankton succeed for once. And it did manage to fool me into thinking this might actually be a genuinely loyal customer, which made the ending even more surprising, but also kinda sweet, that Karen actually cared enough about Plankton to make it so that he finally has a customer for once. So his reaction to all of this was really frustrating to see for me, and of course I can't go without noting how completely unnecessary it was to show skinless Plankton. Could you please not? Number 27, Sunbleached. So, some parts of this episode were pretty strange, like that extreme commercial they have here, which could have been funny had there just been some more effects or something. As is, it just seems out of place, just like this weird ending of them being burnt to crisp. But what this episode did handle quite well in my opinion was the whole exclusion theme. They portrayed what peer pressure and exclusion can do to you very well. So, what's the reason it's not higher up? Patrick, it's Patrick. He's the worst here. Number 26, Spongecus. There is a lot of pointless stuff in this episode, like that strange ending with SpongeBob and company laughing endlessly for no reason, or that phone booth gag in the beginning, and most of the jokes in general really fall flat in my opinion, but that overall setup with the Colosseum and the lionfish pun are kinda cool. It probably just needed some more polish. I often mention how specials don't exactly need to be specials most of the time, but this one could have definitely used the extra length. Patrick and Spongebob in Roman times having to defend themselves in combat against their equivalent of Julius Caesar? Now that's something I would have loved to see. Something like an Asterix parody. I barely ever see that comic referenced anywhere. Number 25, Charm Caverns. Dig Dug was one of my favorite games when I was 6 or so. For my birthday that year I got a little bootleg GBA cartridge with 120 games or something on it, containing stuff like a weird Sonic skinned Mario edition or some weird 2D side-scrolling shooter, which I wasn't able to find to this day. I'm still looking for an original copy of that one. But there was also Dig Dug on there, and I have lots of fond memories of that game, and I think that some of the visuals in this episode that are quite obviously paying homage to it are really cool. Some other shots like this little panning shot of the Chum Caverns, but other than that, it's just not all that special. It's a strange copy of another episode coming up on this list, but everything that it does differently from that one doesn't really stand out positively, like these weird chum monster things. I'm done talking about the episode, could you get those away now please? Number 24, House Fancy. I'm very torn on whether I actually like this episode or not, which is why I ended up putting it dead center on the list. I enjoy seeing what they come up with for this imaginary TV show within the TV show, which can be a very cool concept, and the host for the show is also the perfect pretty boy for the job, plus Williams Tower's interior is pretty nice to look at. But that's exactly it. The episode doesn't do a whole lot except show basically all of said tower's furniture and such. Except for the second half, which is pretty much just more Squidward torture porn. There are a bunch of unfunny jokes, like the toilet crawling into Squidward's arms, which just can't smell all that great, and especially the infamous toe scene, which was one of the main reasons I ultimately didn't want to watch the show anymore as a kid. So while there is a lot to enjoy in this episode, I'm not entirely sure if the good outweighs the bad, even if Squidward does end up winning in the end for once. Number 23, Nautical Novus. I found it to be kind of fun to see SpongeBob so eager to prove to Mrs. Puff how much he has learned about the history of boating and was reminded of just how much I hate museum tours throughout the whole thing. But unfortunately there weren't all that many memorable jokes. It was more like fun throughout, but nothing really worth mentioning after all. And also it was kind of unnecessary to expose SpongeBob for not really driving the boat in the end. I would have liked it more had they just focused on SpongeBob leading the tour and cut the part with him driving out entirely. Number 22, Patty Caper. As someone who pays close attention to animation errors and continuity within the episode, this one was just a pain to watch. 1 second the hole is there, the next it's not. 1 second it's a regular patty, the next it's chum. And the resolution in the end is also a pretty lame excuse, like come on, Mr. Krabs is cheap, but he isn't that cheap. But I really did enjoy watching Patrick and SpongeBob interrogate all the others and all the different scenarios in which the patty caper could have played out. Those were very fun to see. It surprises me that SpongeBob never actually considered Patrick being the culprit though.
Buddy.
No, I guess that explains itself. Number 21, Shuffleboarding. There's a lot of unnecessary stuff in this episode, like the murmuring bit in the beginning, which just drags on forever, which was probably also ultimately the reason for why they didn't have enough runtime to show the part where they actually play shuffleboard. And that conversation between Man Ray and Mabel also drags on a bit too long, but it's certainly a better Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy episode than those from season 5 were. It could have used a lot more polish in terms of structure, but some of the jokes, like Man Ray's shrunken head, or the fish falling down after the prison exploded, and them then chasing after the real Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy are pretty good. Number 20, The Slumber Party. So as you may already know, I'm a huge defender of Pearl in the show. I think she didn't get utilized enough in the first 3 seasons, and I'm really happy she's gotten more good episodes since the 4th one. And this one is no exception, because some of the jokes, like SpongeBob's disguise, or Pearl's friends being stopped from pouring boiling oil on SpongeBob, which is more than a little questionable, and the overall tone of the episode were just plain fun. That being said, I think that the whole zombie stuff towards the end of the episode is very unnecessary, and that this episode would have probably been better off had it focused more on Pearl and less on SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs. Number 19, Computer Overload.
Feast your screen on this!
So I don't exactly love how unnecessarily mean Plankton is towards Karen in the beginning of the episode, but we actually see him learn something in the end, which doesn't happen all too often. And the two of them also share a very sweet moment here. I love the way they animate him, plus the different robots they came up with are also pretty cool. I just wish there were some more memorable moments in this episode. It was a bit too similar to number 18, Single Cell Anniversary, which again heavily deals with Plankton's and Karen's relationship, but does so much better, because it has some genuinely sweet moments, with Plankton finally learning what love is, which is basically the same plot as Fun. Okay, I get it. The season often rips off other episodes, sometimes even from the same season, but I don't mind that if it improves upon the concept of the original, which it doesn't exactly do, but it also wasn't exactly the same. Plus, it didn't fail at entertaining me. I found the song to be pretty cute, SpongeBob was very supportive in this episode, which was nice to see. But I will admit that Plankton trying to steal the formula in the end came a bit out of nowhere. Although, to be fair, this is still Plankton we are talking about, what did you expect? Number 17, Dear Vikings. I used to think that this episode was the funniest thing ever, especially the way the Vikings talk, and now that I rewatched it, I will admit that it doesn't hold up all that well. What I will say, however, is that the German version works far better in this case for some reason. I enjoy listening to the Vikings talk a lot more than in the original. While the jokes aren't terrible in this episode, most of them do fall flat because of their delivery, but I can't stay mad at the episode just because of that. I guess you could say I've taken a Viking to this episode. Number 16, Krabby Chronicle. Regarding this guy. Who exactly goes around asking people if they would let themselves be punched in the gut for no specific reason whatsoever? Especially considering this guy stands there in his trench coat acting all creepily. This moment with Larry was just a little too convenient for my taste. But other than that, it is a nice enough portrayal of how the media often puts their greedy sensationalism above providing actual news, which I guess makes this episode even more topical in 2018. Plus there are some clever ideas, like Patrick and his lamppost, which is just so dumb that it really made me chuckle when I rewatched it. But in my opinion, they didn't go crazy enough. Some of the stories could have used a little more pizzazz. Maybe if they focused a little less on the impact the stories have had on the characters and more on the stories themselves, this could have been a little funnier. As is, it is a nice enough reference to actual media, but nothing really more than that. Number 15, Alive in a Day. I'm more than a little surprised they didn't just call this episode Living Like Larry. I'm sure there were some legal issues preventing them from doing that, because that is just too golden of a title to pass out on. And while you could argue that this episode is basically just pre-hibernation week, only with Patrick instead of Sandy here, I find exactly that to be an interesting idea. To see the usually so laid back and unathletic Patrick suddenly so into extreme sports and such, and especially to see Larry as a role model for the two that admits to not being perfect, which is refreshing to see from a so often one-dimensionally portrayed character like him. I also found the action scenes to be kinda cool, but where this episode definitely falls flat is in terms of humor, because there was barely any in this episode. Number 14, Ditchin'. So I'm actually curious to know here, were or are you ditches in school? Because I was always too big of a mama's child to ever dare ditching school, as in just leaving or not going to school in the first place. I did fake being sick once or twice, but nothing more than that. I was just too afraid, and when I first saw this episode, I kinda felt justified in my assessment of what could happen if I were to actually do it at some point, the episode portrays the whole scenario pretty well, with SpongeBob's reason for wanting to ditch being a very plausible one, and the part where he wants to make it back in time kind of being the most interesting part of this episode. And I sorta wish they had him do even crazier stuff when he had the chance to ditch for once, so that it would have been even more hard-hitting once he realized that he had to go back to class. Number 13, overbooked. I said in my seasons 1 to 3 video that I liked when they break the fourth wall, and I therefore also like this shot quite a lot, not to mention that intertwining plots always allow for a fair share of creativity, which they definitely did utilize here, with SpongeBob being the one overdoing it with appointments for one evening being a good plot for an episode. And I like how the whole thing through you never got the feeling that he would give up eventually, that he was good enough of a friend to want to make everyone around him happy, making the breaking point even more hard-hitting. So construction-wise, I really don't have much to criticize here, but what I will say is that I didn't like some of the moments that really felt like filler, such as whenever they put together the telescope, and the cloning bit in the end also wasn't all that necessary. Number 12, Grandpappy the Pirate. The pirate slang is quite cool to see here, especially how Mr. Krabs pretends to know how to talk like his grandfather, but really doesn't at all. Reminds me of my miserable attempts at talking in dialect. Not to mention that the Krusty Krab being turned into a pirate ship is a nice idea. If only it wasn't done in Arc already. But to be fair, this episode has a very different plot than that episode, and brings enough new ideas to the table to warrant its existence, with Mr. Krabs actually being exposed in the end, yet still having a sweet moment with his grandpappy. Plus some of the humor, such as the movie scene, were also quite entertaining. Number 11, Chum Bucket Supreme. I really enjoy needlessly complicated constructions that go from A to B for some reason. Patrick and Plankton working together is a very refreshing combination, and I think that the whole episode is a great representation of how real-life marketing sometimes gets put above the actual product.
Chum tastes awful.
Yeah, but the slogan is so catchy that we can't stop eating it.
Chum is fun.
There are also some very good jokes in this episode, like how there is a picture of SpongeBob screaming on the slideshow, and just that whole slogan in general. It's so dumb, I love it. It's definitely one of the funniest episodes of this season in my opinion. The only reason it isn't higher up is because it does get a bit draggy at times, especially considering they didn't even change the slogan, so much of the last third is basically more of the same. So if this were to be fixed, I think this episode could have been even better. Penny Foolish, I think, gets too much hate. It has some quite entertaining moments and isn't nearly as stupid as people make it out to be. Don't get me wrong, it is far from perfect. The beginning scene feels very lazily copy-pasted, for example, and it's quite stupid how that gum/dollar bill at the end isn't even the same color as the penny, but for me there's just something very charming about it. Mr. Krabs is portrayed as his usual greedy self, but goes to even bigger extremes than usual. The way he just doesn't let go of this stupid penny and comes up with more and more elaborate schemes to get it. And I also like a lot of the jokes, like this one.
You know, I'm not really hungry. Yeah, let's go see what this fat guy is yelling about.
So it gets a pass for being an entertaining episode with a few flaws. Unintentional alliteration alert. Number 9, not normal. As far as structure is concerned, this episode is really freaking great. It jumps straight into action, doesn't waste any time on establishing why SpongeBob isn't normal, and is over exactly when needed to be. SpongeBob not being able to turn back at first is a surprising little twist, and it's also nice to see the people around him very obviously not liking that new image he has made for himself after a while. I think it's a nice lesson about acceptance and being happy with who you are. Tom Kenny does a really good job portraying SpongeBob as lifeless as possible in this episode, and I think there are also some really good jokes in this one, like the little instructional DVD in the beginning. It's kinda like the SpongeBob version of episodes like Patrick Smartpants, and I think it does a much better job at portraying a character as its complete counterpart, as far as characteristics are concerned. And I think that had they turned this one into a special, it could have worked really well, especially when compared to a special like Who Bob Wattpants, that also has SpongeBob being told that he should behave differently and ends up being really unhappy with himself because of it. But unlike that episode, this one actually had clever writing and interesting ideas, like the Krabby printer here for example. Number 8, No-No's Nose. No-No's Nose follows the trend of a big change happening to Patrick that makes him feel very special at first, only for it to make him ultimately even more unhappy in the end. episode. It therefore also follows in the footsteps of episodes like Patrick Smartpants and Big Pink Loser 2, and while I wouldn't exactly say that it's better than the latter, since that one is just too iconic to make a fair comparison, I will say that No Nose Knows definitely is on par with it as far as comedy is concerned. Patrick just looks so strange with that new nose of his, and I really enjoyed seeing him having so much fun just going around sniffing stuff and that pure bliss in his eyes, and the ending gag with the ears made me laugh even harder when I first saw it. I think that the construction is also pretty good in this one. It spends no more than a minute to get to the gist of it, and the aforementioned ear gag also doesn't get beaten to death or anything. It is just a fast-paced, fun episode.
We're going to need something foul. A stench that will blow the socks off his fungus-infested socks!
Fungus? Fungus! Number 7, Toy Store of Doom. This one is definitely one of the season's most quotable episodes. Stuff like, I can't hear you, it's too dark in here, or that grandpa saying, where are we going now, boys? Made it into my standard Spongebob joke repertoire a long time ago. Plus Spongebob in his tutu is just too adorable. And other than that, I think that this is yet another fairly well constructed, fast-paced, fun episode, with Spongebob and Patrick living a childhood dream of mine of spending the night in a toy store. Well, I wanted to spend the night in a game store, but close enough. I think the artists did a very good job at portraying what is usually such a joy-filled place, for the kids at least, into a downright nightmarish horror landscape. And I also really like how their antagonist turns out to just be a toy robot, and yet when it is revealed they are still scared of it. It's so dumb. The only real gripe I have with this episode is that when they first go to the toy store, it is kind of unnecessary that it isn't opened right away. I think they could have cut that part with the construction worker out entirely, but other than that, this is a very entertaining episode. Number 6, No Hat for Pat. No Hat for Pat is a very cute episode. Patrick's reaction to when he finally gets the hat and then just falls over is very nicely paced. Plus the whole idea of Patrick just wanting a new hat is so simple, yet it works because it isn't yet another episode of him working at the Krusty Krab. This time he is the main attraction, and it really makes you want to see him succeed and stand up against Mr. Krabs. Which ultimately doesn't exactly happen, but at least the crustacean does end up getting what he deserved. It isn't one that makes fun of Patrick, because he realizes what is being done to him, and yet he still wants to keep doing it because it is what makes him feel fulfilled, and it only goes to prove his and SpongeBob's friendship again in the end. I therefore appreciated the story aspect in this episode quite a lot, and the visual gags are also pretty strong, like Patrick twirling away all the customers with his sign, and how Mr. Krabs' eyes turn into 2 tourists. Not to mention how the customers are portrayed as mindless, entertainment-hungry zombies again, just like in Chum Bucket Supreme and such. It makes for some pretty funny exchanges. The only gripe I have with this episode is that it does feel a bit mean towards Patrick in some parts, but because I don't think it would have worked all that well without it, that didn't end up bothering me all that much. It's still a pretty strong episode. We're entering the top 5 with Krusty Crushes. Let me get this out of the way. I know virtually nothing about wrestling. It was never something that interested me all that much, and while I get the excitement of rooting for your favorite and that it's very fun to see these different moves being applied, I was never in a situation where I consciously wanted to turn on the TV and watch some wrestling. That being said, I definitely did enjoy this episode a lot. I think they found some very creative ways to crush SpongeBob and Patrick, and it just had some very clever visual gags in general throughout the whole thing. Plus it was nice to see so many characters from the Salty Spittoon and even the big guy from the Fry Cook games in the beginning of the episode. And speaking of the beginning, I like how Mr. Krabs goes from not being interested at all and being completely blinded by the money, only to slowly realize that, oh no, I will probably die out there. It's a pretty well constructed beginning and doesn't need a whole lot more than just showing the two of them and their opponents in the ring. I wouldn't be surprised if this was the episode with most time spent in one location, but that doesn't matter at all in the end, because it was meant as nothing more than a fun little trial of strength. So while there isn't any depth to this episode, like, at all. I think what they did with it worked out very well, and it's one that always makes me want to go back and appreciate its construction, just like number 4, Sandcastles in the Sand. This episode is one of the most creative ones in the entire series. The different sand creations SpongeBob and Patrick come up with are very cool to look at, and are just also animated very well. And while you could argue that it's basically just a rehash of Battle of Bikini Bottom, it doesn't feel like it, since this one is just way more creatively executed. The war between them feels extremely real, and even goes on after the two of them are basically already completely worn out, which is a very nice way to show that a little competition can't hurt a friendship, which was handled way better than in Battle of Bikini Bottom, so I think this one beats it by a landslide. Or should I say, sandslide? Since most of you already know that this episode is widely considered one of the post-movie's best, I will just say that I didn't particularly love the whole setup. I think that the beginning felt a bit out of place, and they really could have just started off at the Goo Lagoon instead. Plus, Patrick's ripping part of his skin off was also very unnecessary, but other than that, there isn't much to criticize here. It is a very good episode. Number 3, SpongeBob vs. the Big One. Ocean or beach-themed episodes like Phineas and Ferb's Lawn Gnome Beach Party of Terror and movies like Surf's Up were always the ones I enjoyed the most next to snowy ones as far as setting is concerned, because it makes for some not only great visuals but also just a very chill atmosphere in general, and I think this episode captured that quite well. JKL is just also a fun character, especially in scenes such as the one where he leaves the house with his surfboard that just keeps on going and going, and he always has that smug expression on his face. He's really not an inspiration at all, and yet SpongeBob and Patrick religiously follow along everything he tells them to. The contrast between their careless nature and Squidward's stern one shows even more on this tropical island that is usually perfect for relaxation, which Squidward still doesn't seem to be capable of doing here. Their side of the story was not the only one I enjoyed, since Mr. Krabs and the Flying Dutchman's side plot was also very funny, like when the Dutchman gets sent down to the real Davy Jones's locker, or the donuts falling from the sky. That being said, the Aunt Sally joke they have here simply doesn't work on so many levels. Firstly, the Flying Dutchman said before he's never seen Mr. Krabs before, so how would he know about Sally being his aunt? Number 2, the Flying Dutchman was previously clearly portrayed as being older than whatever age Krabs' aunt was in high school. And thirdly, even if she didn't have false teeth back then, why would that mean that she didn't get them since?
It's still a mystery.
So yeah, the jokes aren't perfect, the pacing isn't either, and thinking about the continuity here will just make your head hurt, seeing as how SpongeBob was clearly able to serve in other episodes too, but I'd be lying if I said that the good didn't outweigh the bad for me. The song in the middle of the episode is great, some of the comedy works quite well, the island theme was very well captured, these other surfer dudes are entertaining, the setup is really cool, and the animation is also very obviously superior to most other episodes in the season. I personally found this episode to be a very fun ride, and you best believe I played the crap out of the crappy DS spin-off game.
Rated E for everyone, even you.
Now that's just rude. Number 2, Suction Cup Symphony. This episode, to me, is funny from start to finish. There was barely any joke in it that didn't make me at least smile. From these billboard dudes that just look confused when SpongeBob tries to distract them from Squidward's clarinet playing, to Squidward literally melting away at the thought of being a famous composer, and the rainbow that forms over his head also falling apart as soon as SpongeBob and Patrick distract him from his work again. This episode manages to turn a concept that seems so bare bone and simple into a quite entertaining episode, with a clever twist in that Squidward actually ends up putting the sounds Patrick and SpongeBob made into a symphony, which I know wouldn't actually work on an actual music sheet, but it's just so dumb here that I really do enjoy it, especially how SpongeBob is just blankly staring at the viewer while they do their part, or how Patrick is reading Lazy magazine, and it's also very nice to see that Squidward is the one that gets all the applaud in the end. It's nice to see that his work actually paid off, even though it isn't exactly the result he wanted to achieve. The only episode that is still a little bit better than this one is number 1, Krabby Road. Well, would you look at that? Not only is this basically the first episode of the season along with House Fancy, but it's also number 1, and rightfully so in my opinion. There are too many memorable moments to count here. Patrick playing the belly drum, Spongebob's demonstration of what their song should sound like, super buff Squidward, Plankton's magnificent head of hair, Plankton's disguise as the snot in Spongebob's nose, just wow, so much good stuff. And they fit the music theme very well too, despite not actually ending up playing a song in the end. It's actually very hard for me to find a flaw with this episode. If I had to really pick it apart, I guess you could say that Plankton being locked up in prison in the beginning was kind of unrealistic, seeing as how he was never portrayed as a serious criminal, but I can look past that, because I think not only was the plot of the episode very simple yet nicely structured, but it was also one of the funniest episodes in the show's entire run, and definitely on par with earlier seasons too. And I think not relying on any gross out scenes, torture porn, disturbing imagery, unlikable characteristics of our main cast or anything like that definitely ended up being a big help in that regard. Because just like it was in season 5, I think what this season ultimately failed to grasp was that you don't need unnecessary violence or shocking moments just to keep the audience's attention. If anything, it just drives it away. This is so unfortunate for a show that used to be so heavily focused on its characters and their personalities, their adventures and having fun together. This really isn't anything new at this point anymore, but it's hard not to acknowledge it, seeing as how this trend already started in the previous season and people already started expressing their concerns about it then. So it just baffles me that the showrunners thought it to be a good idea to keep devolving into this complete mess at times. With that being said, do I think that season 6 is the worst thing ever? No, I wouldn't necessarily say so. Because while I do think that season 5 was a big turning point in the show's quality and had a definitely very low average quality in its episode, I think that this one at least had a bunch of episodes that were still enjoyable, despite not being ones I would actively want to go back and rewatch. I mean, don't get me wrong, this season did have some very low points in the series. The bottom 5 on this list I would put on a worst off episode list any day, but I think that especially episodes like Krabby Road and arguably even Sandcastles in the Sand are ones that end up being a saving grace for the season, proving that the show can still be very creative if it wants to. I definitely found more episodes I would actively rewatch in this season than I did with season 5. And while I was definitely torn on the quality of my dead center spot House Fancy on this list, I found the middle spot from the season 5 list, To Save a Squirrel, to be a below average episode, whereas most of the in-between episodes in this season were still enjoyable, which puts it right below season 1 on my ranking scale. I'm sorry, but I just don't think that season 6 is worse than season 5 by any stretch, and while we didn't have a look at the upcoming seasons yet, I would argue that it is far from being the worst. But which one that'll be, I guess we'll have to find out in the future, because that's basically it for this list. Let me know which episodes you would have put on which spot instead, and check out some of my other videos if you're new to the channel. The links are in the description. That's all for now, guys. Take care.